So we are grossly outdated in our systems because the government always takes so long to do everything. And we are so far behind everybody that instead of looking forward, we've tried to focus on keeping the equipment we have alive. Well, that equipment is now, anywhere between 20 and 40 years old, depending on what you're talking about and working with.
Go around.
Let's move on to the big topic of the day. What's going on with the air traffic control system in the US? We've got a lot to cover on this. I am a former controller. I was a center controller, and so I'm going to kind of give
Whoa,
an
whoa,
o
whoa. Yeah, where are you over?
I was at Seattle Center.
Seattle Center. Okay.
Yeah, I have not, it's been almost, and John brought it up, it's been almost a decade since I've been out, but I still talk to all my controller buddies. I'm still trying to keep my finger on the pulse. I did a lot of research to brief this up so I can give you guys a pretty good overview and all the pilots and general people listening an overview of what's going on. I will start off and I'll reiterate this a couple times. I would love to have a controller or happily a NATCA representative come on that is willing and able to talk to us about this. So if anybody is listening that wants to get on here, please reach out to us. All our contact information is in the links. So what's going on? So there's been a lot of public issues going on ever since the midair at DC earlier this year. We now have some public, real big outages that have happened. Newark has been the big highlight airport recently. Denver Center just had a big failure this week. And so what's going on? Why is this happening? Well, we've got outages increasing. So Secretary Duffy, Sean Duffy, who's the DOT secretary in the U.S., on May 8th made an announcement that there are 618 aging radars. There's 4,600 sites that still relay on copper wiring. There's 2,000 radios approaching their end of life, and they all need to be replaced within the next 4 years.
Wow.
So, to give a brief overview of this, I want to go into the history of what the FAA calls their NextGen system, which is their modernization of air traffic control. So back in 1982, the FAA announced the plan to update the National Airspace System, the NAS. It wasn't until 2003 when NextGen was actually conceived. In 2007, the program officially began. In 2010 was the first initial operation capability achieved at Salt Lake City for ERAM, which I'll go into a little bit, which was the en route modernization for air traffic for en route air traffic. So that wasn't until 2010 at Salt Lake. In 2012, the TRACONs got their initial deployment of STARS, which is their new system. I'll put pictures up in the editing process of what the old stuff and new stuff looks like. ADS-B deployment was finally completed in 2014. In 2015, CPDLC initial implementation in the en route airspace. In 2016, 56 airports had PDC available finally. So then in 2020, they finally mandated enforcement of ADS-B, which is kind of the backbone of this NextGen program, because the whole idea of the NextGen program was to transfer from ground-based navigational aids to satellite and modern stuff. This picture I'm pushing up right now actually is from the FAA. When I was in training to be a controller at the academy, they put this picture up for us. So you have the old Connie on the left side that's relying on all the ground base, and then we transition in the middle there to kind of where we're at now, which is half ground based, half satellite based, and in the future they're trying to get where it's almost entirely satellite based, right? Not relying on outdated ground systems. So that's the whole point of what they're trying to do with this next gen program, right? The original target for completion was 2025, which we're at today. Of course, the government being who they are, they've now pushed it out to 2030. So simply stated, the Next Gen's a modernization initiative that's moving the U.S. aviation away from radar-based systems with radio comms on the ground to all satellite-based systems with GPS. It, in theory, will allow the system to handle 3 times the volume, but the traffic is continuing to grow. All this hardware is old and outdated and failing now, and all the updates and the schedule hasn't kept up with demand. So just going back over that quick overview I gave you there, in 1982, they initiated the plan they released to update the NAS. Well, it wasn't until 2003 until they conceived the next gen concept. So that's 20 years. And then here we are an additional 20 years later, and it still hasn't been fully implemented. Sean Duffy said we have 4 years
Not
to
gonna
update
happen.
everything, right? This is just to kind of hopefully give everybody a like, oh my gosh moment of what's happening here, right? We've got a lot to overcome to be able to get this system moving. So what happened, right? So two big public things have happened, not including the midair collision. So we've had Newark falling apart. On April 27th, they had an audio issue that disrupted air traffic communications between controllers at the Philadelphia TRACON, which is a terminal radar approach control center for lay people, which is just kind of an intermediate between the towers and the en route centers. So Area C of that facility, they lost all their radio communications, which is why
It's
they
crazy.
weren't able to
What does that
communicate.
mean, Scott? What does
What
that
it,
mean?
what that means is they were able to still see the aircraft, but the controllers and the pilots couldn't talk to each other. You know, in a tight place like Newark is very difficult because it's underneath all the big New York. You've got LaGuardia, JFK around them, and Newark has to get slid in underneath them for the arrival and departure zones, right? It's real tight airspace. So you're working with like, you need to be able to talk to these guys right now, right now, right now, right now, right now. Because if you don't, that guy's going to fly into somebody else's airspace, which could cause all kinds of conflicts, right? So for 90 seconds, they couldn't talk to each other, which is like an eternity in our world. And in the controller world, it's like a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even imagine sitting there and not being able to talk to somebody. It would be one of the most terrifying things as a controller. So that happened on April 27th. That was the first big thing. Then on May 5th and May 9th, controllers lost all radio communications with aircraft for an additional 60 to 90 seconds. And this was, I believe, Newark specific. On Monday, May 12th at about 1:50 p.m., Denver Air Route Traffic Control Center, which is Denver Center, which is in Longmont, Colorado, experienced a radio communications failure lasting 90 seconds. Just comparison, Denver Center's airspace covers 285,000 square miles.
Huge.
And they lost everything for 90. They could still see everybody, but they couldn't talk to anybody for 90 seconds. The radar still functioned.
And that's affecting multiple states, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, so that's like Montana, Denver, parts of New Mexico, half of Utah, Wyoming, into Kansas, and Nebraska, and the Dakotas. That's like all their airspace. Okay, so that's like, go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What exactly is failing? Do you know, like, is it the copper wire? Like, what exactly is causing the issue?
So I tried to look it up, and obviously they probably, I don't know if they've released that or not.
Yeah.
We can go as deep as you guys want into it. I have enough material to go really deep, but
Dude,
I don't want to get
like,
too technical,
yeah,
like, cause
whatever you want to do.
it could take an hour. Yeah,
I do too.
yeah, there you go, Connor. A good man. I'll try to keep it not too technical, but basically to answer it, it has to do with a lot of the hardware. So the difference between us and Nav Canada per se is our systems are entirely hardware based. It was all about making the best hardware, the best computer systems, this, that, and the other thing. Whereas Nav Canada was like, no. We're going to go software based because that's the future. So our systems are a lot older than everybody else's. So for example, this is a picture of what some of the FAA towers still look like. This might be an older picture,
Wow.
but essentially you've got all your old boards. I know for a fact that a couple towers still look like this because I've been in them. So, you know, these are all old
The
systems, right?
70s.
We are literally, the FAA towers are still using these paper strips you see down here in the corner. They print out these strips and they write on them, like with pens.
To sequence aircraft?
To know who they're talking to sequence aircraft, right? Up here, this is probably a slave display of what the TRACON radar looks like, which is really helpful to a lot of these guys. It kind of gives them a visual, because you know, they're supposed to still be looking out the window with their binoculars and talking to airplanes and have a mental picture of what's going on. But this is what some of the towers still look like in the United States. Okay. For comparison, let me show you a picture of what a Nav Canada tower looks like. So this is a Nav Canada tower. Nav Canada towers.
Wow.
Yeah, everything's touchscreen. Everything is completely software based. It's all beautifully laid out, way more efficient. Now, obviously, I'm giving you two extreme examples, but this picture was taken 15 years ago. So, I mean, their systems are probably even more modern. A good example to all this is when I was at Seattle Center, we were on ERAM. It's the newer version of the en route sectors here in the country of the center. This is what an ERAM sector looks like. Okay. So you've got your main radar controller screen here, and then you have your data controller. So you're usually working, well, now with the shortages, it's one guy working both monitors a lot. But if it's really busy, you can request what's called a data controller, or a D-side, which is an assistant controller who deals with all the flight data on the right. And these are their two screens they work with. You have this pull-down monitor here called eRIDS. I can't remember off the top of my head what it stands for, but it's a touch screen with all your charts and maps and everything. It's a like super informational iPad for controllers. But this is what our systems look like, okay? This was developed in the early 2000s. Lockheed Martin was given the contract for that. In comparison, I can show you what it might not be as readily obvious to people, but like this is what a Nav Canada sector looks like, right? And so it's a lot more clean and efficiently put together. Their systems are just way more advanced. And for example, at the time when I was a controller, our Seattle Center computers could not talk directly to Nav Canada because they were so far ahead of ours. Our computers were so old, they just couldn't communicate. So basically, when an aircraft was crossing the international boundary, we would have our own data tags for that aircraft on our systems. Then Canada would have to generate their own as like a separate aircraft. And then we would have to do something called a manual handoff, which was essentially phone calls saying like, hey guys, you see this airplane right here at the border? Yeah, he's about to cross the border. We're giving you guys control. And then they would have to manually tell their computers, okay, we're in control of this airplane now. It's ours. Whereas, if our computers could talk to each other, the computers would just automatically do that. You click a button, off it goes. You wouldn't have to make these phone calls. It would cut down tons of controller workload. But you imagine how many aircraft are crossing the international boundary a day, right? That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of phone calls between these guys. The government always takes so long to do everything. And we are so far behind everybody that instead of looking forward, we've tried to focus on keeping the equipment we have alive. Well, that equipment is now, anywhere between 20 and 40 years old, depending on what you're talking about and working with.
The FAA has confirmed that it is purchasing parts for aging ATC systems on eBay and 3D printing these
Yep.
parts because they're not there.
Because they don't
It's
make them.
nuts.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and it's a failure beyond failures.
So
The FAA is ordering parts off of eBay.
Yep. For example, STARS, which is the Tracon system they're using now.
Could you imagine if Delta Airlines started ordering parts off of eBay?
Right. Well, dude, it's crazy, right? So this is the STARS terminal that the Tracon guys are using now. It's definitely an upgrade. So STARS was conceived about 25, 30 years ago. They just finished the implementation, I believe, a few years back for all the facilities. Up until that point, everybody was on something called ARTS. And this is what ARTS was. This, like, I'm not kidding. Like, it had the radar sweep, the boop, boop, boop. That was, for example, I had a buddy who was at a tower in Central Texas when I was getting a type rating in Dallas, and I drove down to visit him, and they were this was like 5 years ago, and they were transitioning from this to STARS. They were one of the last facilities. Like, they were still working on this. Like, this is the FAA, right? Like, this is, like, and everybody's always wondering why there's so many problems, because they're working on such outdated stuff because our bureaucracy is so damn bloated, and they haven't been forward looking, and it's creating all kinds of problems. So, long answer. So, for example, like quick info. STARS was initiated in the late 1990s. Raytheon got the contract to develop it in 96. The first implementation was in 2002 at Philadelphia Tracon. They didn't finish deployment until late 2017. So
11 years?
No. That was 15 years.
15, okay, sorry.
15 years for full deployment. It took, I believe they got ERAM deployed in about 12 years. STARS was 15. 13 years to roll out ERAM to 20 facilities. And so And then ADSB had to get brought in, Datacom, which was CPDLC, PDC, all these things. They've been working on that since the early 2000s. We didn't implement it domestically until 2016. Indianapolis Center was the first one to do it. Most other foreign countries, especially the Europeans, have implemented it domestically since the early 2000s. So we're just decades behind everybody because we want to do our own thing and we don't want to learn from the others. At least that's from the outside. That's what it's seeming like. What does it all mean, right? It took 25 years to roll out NextGen, give or take, and we still haven't fully finished it. There's still stuff they need to do. Duffy said we have to have this all updated in 4 years. Nav Canada has been running paperless towers since 1998. We still print strips and write on them with pencils and pens.
That's incredible.
We can't our systems can't communicate with other systems because we're so outdated. That is kind of an overview of what's wrong with the system.